Well, hello, my name is Ethan Barber, and I'm a New York City archival and architectural photographer / videographer, and today I want to share my top 5 tips for how to shoot better video with your iPhone. Are you ready to take your iPhone video game to the next level? The key is to optimize your iPhone's camera before you even start shooting. This way you can minimize the compression that happens when you upload to social sites such as Instagram or TikTok. Now, if you're filming for YouTube or Vimeo or another video platform, these tips might not be the best for you. However, if you're shooting for short-form content, I got you covered. If you're shooting for short-form content, you're going to want to switch your iPhone's video format from high efficiency to most compatible. This is a highly debated topic, but for me personally, I find that when you shoot in most compatible, it records your video in a .mov format versus .heic. Now, apps like Instagram, for example, work much better when compressing video in an MOV format versus HEIC, which is an Apple standard format. By shooting in most compatible, this allows you to record video at 4K versus 1080, or using a third-party app like CapCut to compress your video before you upload. Tip number 2, turn off the extras. If you're shooting with an iPhone, by default, they come with features like HDR turned on. Now, while you can use HDR to your advantage, and it's a really amazing feature, if you're shooting for social-first content, you're gonna wanna turn these features off. As of right now, Instagram only supports HDR for a select amount of accounts. For accounts that don't have access to this feature, Instagram will compress your video even further once you post it, which in turn makes it look even more grainy and pixelated. Please hold, we'll be right back. And we're back. For tip number 3, 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. It's widely debated over whether 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second is preferred for short-form content on Instagram. Obviously, 24 frames per second is cinema standard, and if you want to shoot slow-mo, you're going to go higher at 120 or 240. But when it comes to short-form content, is 30 or 60 better? For me personally, I choose to shoot in 30 frames per second because it gets as close to cinema standard while still being supported by apps like Instagram and TikTok. Additionally, as I recommended in tip number 1, if you're capturing video in most compatible, you cannot shoot 60 frames per second as of now in most compatible. Your iPhone will automatically switch to high efficiency mode to capture that video. Thus, in turn, you're going to have to use a third-party app to compress that footage to get it social first. The whole point of these tips is for you to be able to optimize your iPhone so that you can get out on the street, capture the video, and get it right online without having to take extra steps. Tip number 4, shoot slow and steady. When it comes to video, you have to remember that every movement you capture will be recorded on video. The slower you move and the more steady you are with your camera will allow the built-in stabilization to do its job more effectively. And by moving slower, especially if you're shooting at a lower frames per second, like 30, you're gonna wanna get as much detail in those frames as you're panning your camera. Additionally, no one wants to see shaky footage unless you're filming it with a very specific reason. I don't know what that would be, but to each their own. Tip number 5, don't be afraid to experiment. It took me years to figure out my personal style in both photography and videography. And while these tips work great for me and what I need, they might not be the most ideal tips for you. I challenge you to get out in the field, experiment, figure out what works best for you. If you want to shoot at a higher frame rate, if you want to shoot in high efficiency, if you want to shoot at a lower resolution, you absolutely can. I encourage you to do that because I shoot exteriors, I shoot in the middle of the day, I shoot for natural light. If you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting indoors, if you're shooting at night, you're gonna wanna find which settings work best for you. These tips are what I use and hopefully they helped you. So thank you for watching, I appreciate it.